10. I am in Cavendish Square, and the reason I've come here is because there's an aspect of your Jekyll and Hyde coursework which I feel I haven't explained properly, so I thought I'd do it here in Cavendish Square. Now, this is the square which is of course associated with Dr. Lanyon. Dr. Lanyon is characterized by Stevenson to live here. His house is in Cavendish Square. And if we look around at the buildings here, if we look around at the buildings in Cavendish Square, which Stevenson describes as the great citadel of medicine, we can understand why. We can indeed imagine Stevenson looking around Cavendish Square when he was writing the novella. Now, these buildings, these Victorian buildings, these examples of metropolitan luxury. Remember, London was developing at the time, and buildings were going up which were really, really beautiful, which were really sophisticated. And what Stevenson was doing was associating his characters, Dr. Lanyon, Mr. Utterson, and Dr. Jekyll. These characters who personified the Victorian codes of conduct with these buildings. He wanted to show that London had this civilized, this refined, this genteel even side to its character. People were civilized in the city just as much as many of its buildings looked sophisticated, looked very urban. Now, of course, Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde isn't a novella which is only about characters who are refined, who are genteel. It also has characters such as Mr Hyde, who represents the inner demons, this idea of the beast within man, this idea of a beast which wanted to break out, which was in contrast to the civilized characters. Stevenson wanted to show that just as Mr Hyde exists, so too London, which has places such as Cavendish Square, also had a beast within. There was a beast within London, and the way he does this is by showing Soho, and by associating Soho, this example of urban depravity, with Mr Hyde. By doing so, Stevenson was showing that London too had its own sense of character. It too, just like Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, was quite dualistic. It had two sides. The only other way I can show you what I'm trying to say is by actually taking you to Soho. So, through the magic of the camera, I thought we'd go to Soho to try and find some of these examples of urban depravity. Okay? So, off we go. This is Soho, and I brought you here because I wanted to show you a different side to London's character. Now, Soho winds further back behind me. It's a bit more colourful back there. This is one of the many avenues of Soho, and as you can see, looking around, it's quite dirty, it's quite decayed. In the Victorian period, Soho was the prime example of urban depravity, and there's poverty everywhere. And we can understand why, just from looking at this small little lane here, why Stevenson would have wanted to associate it with the one character in the novella who represents man's inner demons, those inner desires, Mr Hyde. Now, in the Carew murder case, when Mr Utterson comes to Soho, he describes it as like a district of some city in a nightmare. He talks about its muddy ways and slatternly passengers. He also associates it with ideas of darkness. He talks about how it's dark like the back end of evening. There's also a lot of fog everywhere, which is quite broken up. This idea of a nightmare aspect of the city is associated by Stevenson with Mr Hyde, because he wanted to show that London had a part of its character, a different side. There was an example of duality within the city itself. There was an example of duality within the city itself. It had two sides. It had what we saw in Cavendish Square, those sophisticated buildings which were associated with Mr Utterson, Dr Lanyon and Dr Jekyll. But there were other parts of the city, a different side of the city which could not be ignored, which was this, which was Soho. Just as Soho could not be ignored, Stevenson was saying that there were parts of man which could not be ignored, these repressed desires. Stevenson was trying to say that man had two sides to his character, just as London had two sides to its character. Now, when I want you to write about this example, this idea of London being a character in the novella, I want you to talk about it in this way. Talk about what Stevenson was showing by using quotations in your writing, what Stevenson was showing in regard to the two sides to London's character and the relationship between the duality of the city and the duality of man. Now, I've talked for long enough and I do need to get back to the classroom. So with that, I shall now return. Okay?